All right, so good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are really excited this month of April because all month long we are celebrating and showcasing climate change research and climate change impacts and how we can, mitigate it and cause solutions. It's been a very exciting month, all made possible by Environment and Climate Change Canada, so we want to give a big thanks to them. Right now, we've got 4 classes from all across the U.S. joining us, so I want to give them a chance to do a bit of a shout-out. We've got Miss Santiago's grade 5s in Dover, New Jersey. Hi, guys. Hi. Right down the hall and joining us for the first time for Miss grade 4s, Miss Fleister's class in the very same school. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi. We've got Miss Also Brooks, grade 3s from San Antonio in Texas. Hi. Hey, and last but not least, we've got Mr. Kozaczynski's grade 2s in Canton, Michigan. Hi, everyone. Wow, that was exciting. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speakers. So we are joined live by Dr. Mary Gagen. She is a dendrochronologist, so she's a physical geographer at Swansea University in the UK. She works on how climate change impacts forest ecosystems and how trees are responding to it over time. So she studies ancient forests in some of the most amazing places in the world. And today she's going to share a little bit about her story, her journey, and what we can learn from ancient trees, which I'm sure you guys will be every bit as fascinated with as I am. Without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gagen, and take it away.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And give me 1 second here. I'm going to get my presentation started. So just give that a second to come around. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Gagen. And as Jesse just said, I have a very strange job title. I am what we call a dendrochronologist. What that basically means is I'm a tree scientist. So hopefully what you guys can all see on your screen right now is a very small picture of me and a very, very big tree behind me. And this is an avocado tree. This is one of my favorite trees that I've ever worked with. This tree was growing in some very unusual forests on an island called La Gomera, which is part of the Canary Islands, just off the coast of Africa and the Atlantic Ocean. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I have this strange job looking at the information that is inside the trunk of a tree. So first of all, this is my strange job title of dendrochronologist. So dendro comes from the Greek word for tree, and a chronologist is someone who studies something that changes through time. I'm sure you have all seen the inside of a tree trunk. There are rings that go around the middle of the tree. And we often learn pretty much when we're as young as you are, or even younger, that those rings that we're looking at are growing 1 per year. So those trees lay down a new ring for every year of their life. So that's really interesting. And when we look at the inside of tree trunks, we can quite often see patterns of wide rings and narrow rings. And we can find out how old the tree was from counting the rings through time. But if we look a bit more closely, we can see these quite complicated patterns. Early in this tree's life, there was a ring which was really quite wide. And then here there was a ring which was a bit narrower. And sometimes the summer wood, the darker wood, is really narrow, and sometimes it's a little bit wider. So there's lots of variability in there. If any of you have ever grown plants or vegetables in a garden, or you have people in your family that do that, you will know that plants, and remember, trees are plants, even really big old trees, plants really care about the weather. They change their growth according to whether it was sunny and warm, or whether it was really difficult to grow that year, whether it was cloudy and dark and cold and there was frosts and all these things. And what that means is these incredible huge trees store information about what the weather was like and the climate was like back through time for hundreds and hundreds, and in some cases where trees grow for thousands of years, for thousands and thousands of years. So people like me get to hunt around the world to find where the oldest and sometimes the biggest trees are that can give us information about what the climate was like in the past. Okay, well, hopefully you guys are thinking that's an interesting thing to do, but why do we need to do that? Why do we look at tree rings? So I've just popped up a picture on your screen there that's got lots of colored blobs. And this is a graph produced by a very smart scientist, a climate scientist called Ed Hawkins. And it shows how temperature has changed across the United States over about the last 100 years, from about the year 1895, over on the left-hand side, where the names of the states are, to last year, to 2018, over on the right-hand side. And this gives us a picture of how our climate is changing. We can see a few patterns. We can see that about 100 years ago, it was cooler than the average conditions. And we can see there's a patch in the middle in the 1930s when it was quite warm in lots of places, when we know there was times of drought and times of failure of agricultural crops and the Dust Bowl. And then we can see a cooler patch, and then we can see lots of very dark red stripes over on the right-hand side. And when we look at the climate in a specific place, in the city where we live, it's not as good a picture, it's not as accurate a picture as when we look at the climate in lots of different places at the same time. So we need to look at lots of different places, but we need to look over a long time scale to understand how our climate is changing as well. So really, if we want to understand what's going on here, we need this picture to be much longer. We need this picture to go all the way over here, all the way off the left-hand side of the screen and all the way over to the windows in your classroom. And we can't do that because we haven't been able to measure weather data from computers and from meteorological stations for more than about the last 100 years. You look down this list, you'll see that Alaska and Hawaii are missing from this list because we don't have long enough climate information from those states to build this picture. And that's where our clever trees come in handy, because we can look at the information stored in the rings of the trees, and it helps us to extend this picture back in time. So I've popped up a picture on the screen here of a tree that had a very, very bad year for growing in 1453. This is a pine tree, and you can see the rings. This is zoomed in, so you can just see a little section of the stripy rings in the tree trunk. And in 1453, there was a huge volcanic eruption. We actually don't know which volcano erupted, but we know it was somewhere near the island of Vanuatu in the South Pacific. This eruption was so huge, it put so much dust into the atmosphere that it made it really, really hard for plants to grow. We need sunlight to photosynthesize. And there was so much dust in the atmosphere that the temperature became cooler. And trees all around the world, instead of showing this nice wide band of latewood, show this tiny thin line and show that that summer was just terrible if you were a tree. And we know from historical records, not just from the information in the tree, there were really serious consequences and changes in our climate from this eruption. Agricultural crops failed. There were famines in Europe. So this gives you a little example of some of the amazing information we can find from looking inside old tree trunks. So for the next 10 minutes, we're going to go whizzing around the world, first up to the far northern latitudes to an island called Svalbard, to learn about some plants there. And then we're going to go whizzing all the way down to Borneo, to this beautiful tropical island in Malaysia, to learn about rainforest trees. So before we go any further, I need to tell you how we take a tree sample. The pictures you've looked at so far showed a complete section zoomed in of a tree trunk, but we don't take samples like that unless a tree has fallen down. What we do when we want to take a tree sample from a living tree is we take what is called a core. You can see me up in a trunk of a bristlecone pine tree in the White Mountains in California, twisting a core into this tree in order to remove a small core like this. This little pencil comes out the side of the tree trunk. It's very small, so it doesn't hurt the tree. And then we can see the rings through time. So what's fantastic about my job is still at my age, I'm decades and decades older than you, I still get to climb trees for my job. So that's how we sample trees. So we're going to go whizzing up to the far north of Europe now to learn about boreal forests and Arctic tundra. And this is where we're heading to, Svalbard, this collection of islands way to the north of Norway, only about 900 kilometers south of the North Pole. These are the far polar regions. So why would somebody who works on trees be up there? This is a picture of me standing next to a glacier to the north of Longyearbyen, one of the main towns on the islands in Svalbard. And there are no trees. So as a dendrochronologist, if I landed there thinking I was going to get to sample some ancient trees, I would have been very disappointed. But what I was doing instead, so this, before we go any further, I just wanted to introduce you to some of the other residents of Svalbard. This is polar bear country. This is one of our beautiful, pristine Arctic landscapes where these incredible top carnivores live, hunting on sea ice and living off seals and what they can catch. And these beautiful top predators live on the ice caps in Svalbard. So when we weren't keeping an eye out for bears to make sure we stayed out of their way, I had my nose in the ground looking for these beautiful little plants. This is a plant called the Arctic bell heather. Its Latin name is Cassiope tetragona, and you can ask your teachers to look that plant up, tell you a bit more about it. And just like a tree, Arctic bell heather grows one increment along its stem each year. So instead of growing rings outwards, if we follow the Cassiope stem back along the length of the plant, each little segment is 1 year. And one stem can be 80 or 90 years old. So instead of working on trees, when I work up in Svalbard, I'm working on these beautiful little plants to find the climate information that they contain in the length of their stem each year. And if you watch plants growing at home or in your garden, if you have one, or if you live near a farm or something like that, you'll be able to see the way that plants grow taller as well as wider each year. There are other plants growing up in Svalbard that are almost trees. This is a sample from what we call a polar willow, Salix polaris. If you hold up your little finger, that stem that you're looking at is about the same width as your little finger. And you can see the rings inside this little tree, and there are 80 of them. That little tree trunk, the same length as your little finger, was 80 years old. So there are some amazing plants living in the Arctic that can help us to understand what the climate has been like in the past and how it's changing now. The temperature in the Arctic is warming faster than just about any other place on the Earth. And we need to understand how plants are going to be able to cope with those changes, to understand how every other section of the food chain is going to be able to cope as our planet warms. So we're going to whiz down to Lapland now, a little bit further south to just to the north of a town called Rovaniemi in northern Finland. And this is a beautiful boreal forest where majestic pine trees live for hundreds and hundreds of years. On the left of the image is a frozen lake. When these pine trees die, very often they fall into the lakes. And because it's very cold, they become preserved beautifully for a long, long time. So we can go to those areas and sample the trunks that have fallen into the lake. This shows you how beautifully that wood gets preserved in those cold lakes. The outside ring on this tree trunk is from the year 1711. This tree died 308 years ago and fell into the lake, and it stayed there preserved. And what's fantastic about that is the rings inside this trunk go all the way from 1711 back to the year 1369. So we can look at those climate patterns back through time for hundreds and hundreds of years. So sometimes I get to work up in Svalbard on little plants, and then sometimes in Lapland on these beautiful big pine tree trunks to find out the climate information way back over the centuries from those trunks. Once when we were sampling in the forests near Rovaniemi, we found a very strange sample from a tree that had fallen. It had what was clearly a bullet hole in it. And as I'm sure you all know, the Second World War took place in Europe, and it ended in 1945. And in 1944, there was a big battle in Rovaniemi. And the ring that had this bullet hole in, we were able to date to the year 1944. So these trees sometimes contain information about our own human history as well, which is just fascinating when you sample this tree and you find evidence of what was happening in people's lives those decades ago. So if you're all feeling a bit chilly, we're now going to get warmed up by whizzing down south to the tropical rainforests of Borneo. This is the beautiful island of Borneo. Borneo is the third largest island on our planet. The rainforest in Borneo has existed for 130 million years. And the rainforests in Borneo are so important because although rainforest only covers about 6% of the surface of our Earth, it's home to around 50% of the plants and animals that exist on our planet. In Borneo alone, we think there are about 15,000 plant species. And Borneo has been heavily agriculturally exploited to produce something called palm oil, which I'm sure you have all heard of. The plantable areas where we can grow oil palm, have been cleared, leaving the rainforest just on either the steepest slopes along the rivers or in very important rainforest conservation areas. About 50 to 60% of Sabah, the northern Malaysian state in Borneo where I do my rainforest research, about 50 to 60% of that state is now forested and about 20 to 30% is oil palm. What's fantastic in Sabah, though, is that the existing primary rainforest is all protected under law. It can't be converted to oil palm. Sabah is so important for preserving some of these iconic, beautiful species, orangutans, clouded leopards, proboscis monkeys, and the tiny little pygmy elephants that live in the forest. So I'm just going to show you a quick video here of forest elephants that we sometimes encounter when we're moving around the forest on dirt tracks. And these incredible, majestic animals require our respect anyway, because they're a beautiful and important part of the forest, but they are really quite dangerous if we get in their way. So what we do if we encounter them when we're driving is to just stop. And you can see in this picture, this mum elephant has a calf with her, a baby with her. So she's keeping a very close eye on what we're doing. And we're about 100 meters away in a car there. So these are some of the incredible animals, even though we're working on the trees, that we get to encounter when we're in these amazing forests. So working in the forests in Borneo is a little bit different. My walk to work when I'm in the Danang Valley Conservation Area in Sabah involves walking along fallen tree trunks, sometimes walking through a river. And you can see in the picture on the left, my most important bit of field equipment for working in the tropics, which are my bright green leech socks that I get to pull up to my knees. And then when the leeches crawl up over the outside of the socks, I can see them and just quietly invite them to go and chew on someone else in the forest. So one of the really interesting things about the trees that we were sampling in Borneo was they were very old trees known as the Borneo Ironwood. Very rare now. Ironwoods, because they were so strong, were exploited for many years for building materials and to make railway sleepers because of the strong wood. Because it's so strong, we had to develop a whole new way of coring these trees. We couldn't just climb up into the tree and twist by hand the borer into the tree. We had to develop a way of drilling into the side of the tree to remove that small core sample. And it took hours and hours and hours to core a single tree. And that's one of the things that we did with our National Geographic grant, to learn how to take samples from these ironwood trees to be able to see how the climate has changed in the rainforest over the last hundreds and hundreds of years. So the last story I'm going to tell you is about a discovery that took place in the Danang Valley very recently. This is my friend Unding Jami climbing the tallest tropical tree in the world. Scientists from the Universities of Oxford and the Universities of Nottingham discovered this tree when they were surveying the rainforest by plane a few months ago. But to check how high this tree was, there's only one way to do it. Unding climbs up the tree on a rope, carrying a tape measure. He has to be really careful not to drop the tape measure. And when he gets to the top, he lets one end of the tape measure go, keeps tight hold of the other end, and reads how tall the tree is. And this, excuse me, this incredible tree is called Menara, which is the Malaysian name for the tower tree. It is 100.8 meters tall. That's 330 feet. It's a species called yellow Meranti. And if there are Minecraft fans in the world, you will know what the yellow Meranti is, because you can grow a yellow Meranti in the world of Minecraft. This amazing tree weighs 180,000 pounds. That's about the same amount as a heavily loaded jet craft, so a Boeing 737 or something like that. Its crown, the bit you can see now in the video, is about 40 meters across. But most of its biomass, so that's its tissue, is in its trunk. Menara has 95% of its biomass in its trunk. Because living in the rainforest, it's really, really important to get up to where the light is as fast as you can. And Menara is growing in a little hollow, protected. You can just see in the background of the video now, there's a little ridge coming around the edge of the landscape there, which is why Menara has been able to grow to be this incredible, unique tall tree. And it's really fantastic that people doing research in these forests and arborists like Unding have been able to find out that preservation of the rainforest is working in Borneo. These trees are still out there. So we're going to move on to a couple of little take-home figures for you to keep in your head. And this is the last slide of the talk. I think I'm bang on 20 minutes, hopefully. So I'm going to pop up some numbers, and I'm going to tell you what these numbers might mean. So you can have a think while I put them up. 700,000 fibers. What might that be? 1 degree. We've got 3 trillion, another big number, and we've got 257%, and we've got 50%. These numbers are all about Earth in our year 2019. 700,000 fibers are the number of plastic fibers that can come out of one single load of washing when we do our laundry and go into our oceans. 1 degree is the average temperature increase over the globe over the last 100 years since we started to interfere with the chemistry of the atmosphere. 3 trillion is the number of trees left on the planet. That's about 50% of the number of trees that existed on the planet, we think, when we started to fell trees to convert land. 250% is the percentage of a very important greenhouse gas currently in our atmosphere. It's not carbon dioxide, it's methane, another really powerful greenhouse gas. So I wanted to leave you with some numbers there that you could use to start a conversation in your classroom about Earth in 2019. And I'm going to stop talking then and take some questions.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Dr. Gagen. That was so neat. Let's dive right in with Miss Santiago's class. If you guys have a question to kick us off, go right ahead.
Okay, go to camera and ask.
Hi.
Hi. What is the oldest tree you've ever encountered?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. The oldest tree I've ever encountered is another tree that has a name. It's called Methuselah, and it's a white mountain bristlecone pine tree that lives in the beautiful forests of California. And I think currently we think it's about 4,752 years old, but you guys can check that and check I'm right. Methuselah is so incredible because Methuselah isn't huge. It's quite a small tree. The bristlecone pines grow way up high in the mountains in a part of California where it's very dry. So actually they grow slowly and they just grow one small ring each year. So Methuselah is one of the most beautiful and incredible trees in the world and the oldest tree I've ever encountered. Thanks for that question. That's a great question.
Great question, and actually preempted the one I was going to ask. So Methuselah is not known to the general public, its location, correct? There's very few people that know where it is because it can be vandalized.
Methuselah is kept secret because we don't want people necessarily to go and, you know, be hugging Methuselah and trying to take pieces away. And Methuselah grows quite close to a trail. So actually, when you go to the White Mountains, you probably have walked very close to Methuselah. Yeah, growing there, what, 1,000 years and hopefully another few thousand.
Just for comparison, by the way, the pyramids were built about the time that Methuselah was a sapling. So this is a very, very old tree. All right, Miss. Oh, go ahead.
I have to talk about mammoths whenever anyone mentions Methuselah. One of the most incredible things about the bristlecone pine trees is these trees that you can touch, and they're right there, still living now. They were growing, they were baby trees when there were still woolly mammoths living in North America and Canada.
Super cool. That's a great analogy. I'm going to add that. All right, Ms. Leicester's class, if you guys have a question, come on up.
We do. We have one.
Come on, yeah, take your time.
What's your favorite thing about your job?
What's my favorite thing about my job? Do I just have to pick one thing? Okay, let me think. So actually, my favorite thing about my job is that I never do the same thing 2 days in a row. And very often, I don't know what I'm going to be doing from one day to the next. So today, I've had to do some computer work this morning. I'm getting to talk with you guys who are the future of our planet this afternoon, which is wonderful. And in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to another country to look at some tree samples. And tomorrow, I'm going into the laboratory to look down a microscope at a really special piece of wood that came from a longbow that an archer used hundreds of years ago. So my job is incredibly varied, and I think that's the best thing about it.
Super cool. What country are you going to?
I'm doing a little loop. I'm going to be in the USA, in Florida, and then up in New Hampshire, and then I'm going to be back in Malaysia.
Excellent. All right. Let's head to Ms. Alsworth's class. You guys have a question. Yeah, you're good.
Is there a specific spot of the tree that you have to cut to see how many years they're alive?
Is there a specific place, like in the trunk, where you core?
Yeah.
That is a super great question. So, yeah, there is. We tend to take a core sample at the same height as a grown-up's chest. And that's for one of two reasons. That's firstly because it's an easy place to hold the borer. If I was trying to core sample up here, I'd be going, oh, I can't reach. Or down by my feet, that would be really difficult. So it's a comfortable place to core at the same height as my chest. But also, that's the age at which the tree will have probably been a few decades old. Lower down the tree, because while the tree is growing wider, it's also growing taller. So if we core at about chest height, we think that we're at the point where the tree was probably a few decades old. So the pine trees that I core in northern Finland, by the time they're up to my chest, so by the time they're probably the same height as you, they're 80 years old. So a tree in Finland that's the same height as you is 80 years old.
Super cool. All right, we'll end our first round of questions, and we're whipping through these guys. So Mr. Kozaczynski's class, you guys have a question? Come on up.
What's the most interesting place you've been, and how many countries have you visited?
Oh my goodness. That's a really great question. The most interesting place I've been. I'm actually going to go with China for the most interesting place I've been, because when we get to travel a lot, very often we're in places that they may be very different from where we live, but they're quite familiar. When I travel to America, I have friends and family who live in the US. I've lived there myself, so I don't feel too much like a foreigner. I speak a similar language. I can be understood. I can understand people. And that's super interesting. But what I think is really interesting is when we go to places where we basically feel like an alien. We don't recognize anything. We can't speak the language. All the food is different. Everything smells different, looks different. And the first time I went to China, I felt like I understood what it really felt like to be foreign and not understand what was going on, and to start to learn about this beautiful new culture and wonderful new people. So I like to find places where I basically feel like a Martian, and that's what I find really, really interesting. There was a second part to that question. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, it was how many countries have you been to in the world?
I don't know. I'm going to have to count. I would say 15, 16, something like that, but I'm not sure. I can tell you the countries I've lived in. I've lived in the USA, I've lived in Ireland, I've lived in Namibia, I've lived in South Africa, and I've lived in Wales and in England. So I can tell you that I've lived in those countries, but how many I've traveled to, I'm not sure.
That is a good problem to have. All right, let's head back to Ms. Santiago's class. If you guys have a second question, come on up.
How high have you ever been on a tree?
Oh, great question. So I've never climbed a tree with a rope, like my friend Unding, who I showed in that picture. I've never climbed up with a rope. So probably the highest I've been before one of my colleagues says, Mary, you need to get down from there, is maybe only 3 or 4 meters, something like that. So not that high, but I'm going tree climbing next time I'm in Malaysia. So then I'm going to be up there, not 100 meters, but probably 50 or 60 meters. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Quick follow-up question. Is there a reason that you haven't climbed trees thus far? Is there, like, I don't know.
I haven't needed to do my work, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. Very often people who do explorers are they're super sporty, and they're really fit, and they're really agile. And I'm not like that at all. I'm quite clumsy. I trip over a pattern on a carpet. Yeah. So very often when we do science expeditions, it's all about a team. We have some people who are really good at the physical stuff. What I'm really good at is planning and making things work and making sure everything's safe and all those kind of logistics. But I'm not the super physical person. So I tend to be with the clipboard taking the measurements while somebody else is up the tree.
Well, we look forward to hearing how your first expedition to 50 meters goes soon. All right, Ms. Leister's class, if you guys have a second question, come on up.
Yes, one more.
Perfect.
Hi.
Does the height of the tree have to do with how old it is?
Oh, that's such a brilliant question. So, simple answer to that is kind of. I think I said in my talk that trees need to grow wider each year. They want to grow their trunks nice and wide, but what they really want to do is grow tall. And they will put more resources in going upwards than they will into growing outwards. So sometimes in some places where there's lots of competition for light in the forest, like in the rainforest, we find that the oldest trees are the tallest. But in some places, there isn't a lot of competition. Sometimes there's just a few trees scattered around in the landscape. Generally in places where the climate is really harsh, so up at the tree line in mountains, where there's maybe just 1 or 2 trees clinging onto a cliff. And very often in those areas, the trees that are really old are the smaller trees. So that's a really, really good question. Sometimes big means really old, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it's actually the smaller kind of trees that look like they've had a really hard time. They're all twisted and a couple of their branches have been struck by lightning and are falling off. Sometimes it's those guys that are really old. And I've been caught out that way before. I've hiked up to 12,000 feet in a mountain and found that there's just baby trees up there and all the old guys are lower down hanging off the cliffs.
Excellent question. Before we go to our next question, actually, one of the classes wants to know where you're joining us from today. Where are you calling in from?
I am in beautiful sunny Swansea, which is a coastal town in South Wales. You guys can look it up afterwards. We are literally right by the sea. So this is my hometown now in Wales, and it's right on the coast in one of the most interesting estuaries in the world because we have the second highest tidal range in the world. Twice a day, our ocean drops by nearly 13 meters and vanishes all the way out into the Bristol Channel and then comes flooding back over the mudflats later in the day. So I'm in sunny Swansea.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, let's also go to class. Come on up, guys. Yep.
Can music affect the growth of trees?
Can music affect the growth of trees? I think maybe you've seen an advert on YouTube or on the internet about that. I have never seen any evidence that music can affect the growth of trees, but that doesn't mean it's not true, because things that we don't know yet are just waiting out there for you guys to discover. Can I ask a question back to you? Have you guys done an experiment to see if you think that music can affect plants?
No.
Well, you can do that. You guys can totally do that experiment and see if it does.
Yeah.
What?
We did
that experiment to do. So I would say no, but you guys should find out.
Yeah, we'll do a follow-up hangout later. We'll test it. Science in action. All right, Mr. K's class. You guys have a second one? Come on up.
We learned about rocks and minerals. Do you study amber? What can you learn about it?
So you learned about rocks and minerals, and then what was the second part?
Do you study amber? What can you learn about it?
What can we learn from amber? Okay, that's a great question. So my first degree, when I took my first college degree, was in geology, and I studied rocks and minerals then. But then I discovered that the green things that grow on top of the rocks and minerals were what I really loved, so started working on trees. So I bet you guys know a lot more about amber than I do. I've never studied amber myself, but I do know, I'm sure you guys know, that it's the fossilized resin that comes out of trees. One of the reasons, of course, that it's so important is because animals get stuck in resin, and we can end up with the fossilized remains, generally of insects, stored inside amber. I can tell you a bit about resin before it gets fossilized, because resin is amazing stuff. Resin is how a tree protects itself. So when we take a core out of the side of the tree, we've made a hole in the tree. We've not made a big hole, but we've made a small hole. And you might think that we might shove something in there to fill the hole, stick a Band-Aid over it. But we actually don't do that, because we discovered that when we do that, it's not as good as just letting the tree with its lovely liquid resin fill the hole itself. Resin is how the tree protects itself from bugs, from bacteria or fungus that might grow into that hole. And nothing that we put into that hole is as antibacterial or as antifungal or as powerful as the tree resin. So when we core sample a tree and create a small hole in the side of the trunk, when we go back the next summer and a few summers later, the resin will have slowly filled up that hole. There'll be a scar on the outside of the tree, and the tree will be protected by its own resin. So resin's amazing stuff. The other cool thing about resin is most of it's not the color of amber. A lot of it is all kinds of crazy colors. Very often the trees that we work with in Borneo, the resin is like white, like Elmer's wood glue. It's kind of this sticky white stuff. It smells really bad. And sometimes there's so much of it that it sprays out of the side of the tree when you're coring it, and you end up completely covered in it. So resin is amazing stuff. It's as clever as our blood.
Super cool. Mary, do you have time for more questions? Can we go through the classes again, or?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Miss Santiago's class, come on up, guys.
What's the craziest animal you ever saw?
What again?
What's the craziest animal you ever saw?
Ooh, can you say that again for me?
Yeah, sorry, guys.
What's the craziest animal you ever encountered?
The craziest animal you've ever encountered, or animal?
Craziest animal?
Yeah.
The craziest animal I've ever encountered. Well, I'm going to let you guys into a secret, as long as you promise not to tell anyone. I love all animals. If I wasn't doing this, I probably would have been a biologist. But I'm actually kind of scared of snakes. So working in the rainforest, there are lots and lots of beautiful insects. Some of them are really big, and some of them are highly venomous. The centipedes, the millipedes are beautiful, gentle creatures. There are spiders, there are leeches. not scared of any of them at all, and you see them all the time, it's very rare to see snakes. They're not dangerous to us at all. They want to get out of our way, but I'm really terrified of them. So the very first time I went to Borneo, I was, you know, a little bit apprehensive. When we go to new places, we're quite often a little bit apprehensive. And when you leave the city, you get onto smaller and smaller roads, and eventually you leave last town behind and you're onto dirt tracks, and you drive hundreds of miles down these dirt tracks way into the forest. And just as we left the hardtop road, a massive snake, I don't know what it was to this day, we believe it was a python. It was huge. It was the width of the car, slithered right in front of the truck. And no one who I was with had ever seen one before in the forest. They're very rare. No one had ever seen a snake do that. And pretty much every time I'm in the rainforest, that happens. Someone says, wow, I've never seen that snake before. So sometimes that happens. This is the animals that you're most scared of, kind of have a habit of stumbling across you. But I'm trying to think the craziest. Probably, you know what? I probably should tell you guys a leech story. The rainforest is full of wiggly leeches. Now, some of you maybe live in areas where there are the little small leeches in watery places, and if you swim in the wrong swim hole, you get leeches on you. So rainforest leeches are kind of this big. They're long, and when you walk through the rainforest after rain, every single leaf has a wriggly leech on it, and they are amazing creatures. They can sniff out the CO2 that is coming off our bodies, and if you kind of just hold out your hand near a leaf that has a leech on, they will wriggle their way onto it. So at the end of the day, we kind of have to pick leeches off ourselves, and they like to hide in places of your bits of your body that are warm and dark. I'll leave you with that story. So the craziest animal is probably a Borneo tiger leech. You guys can look up the Borneo tiger leech afterwards.
We've had a story before where someone was walking through the woods and like literally they could hear the leeches coming through the undergrowth towards them. Terrifying. All right, Ms. Leicher's class, you guys have fun. Come on up. Great questions, everyone, by the way.
Is sap the same thing as resin?
Say that to me again.
Is sap the same thing as resin?
Is sap the same thing as resin? That is a really great question. Sap is similar to resin, but a little bit different. So sap is, generally speaking, the sugary fluids that trees and plants move from their roots way up to their leaves in order to get food to make their leaves. And the sap flows through vessels, just little pockets, long tubes, kind of like straws, you can imagine them, through the tree, up to be used in making all the tissues that the tree needs to make. But within the wood, as well as the phloem vessels that the sap moves through, there are little pores that we call resin ducts and resin pockets. And that's where the special resin lives. So the sap is more the plant's food. The resin is more its defense system.
Okay, great question. All right, Miss Alsop's class.
Have you gone to any dangerous or forbidden places to get samples from trees?
Ooh.
Dangerous or forbidden places. I haven't been to any places where we weren't allowed to be. So one of the most important jobs that we do as scientists before we plan an expedition is figure out who we need to ask to be in their country, to be in their place or on their land. We're guests in the country when we sample. So there's a whole process of applying for permits and to work out with the local people who live and work there, maybe run charities there, the local government, what's the right way for us to work with them to sample trees. That's a big part of my job, doing that background research. But places that were dangerous, that's actually a really interesting question, because when I was your age, I thought science expeditions were kind of really dangerous, and it was crazy wild people going out to hang off cliffs and balance on icebergs and this kind of thing. And then I realized as I got older that danger is different from risk. And what we do when we do expeditions and when we go exploring is to minimize risk as much as we can. And that means that we think about ways to make ourselves safe. It doesn't mean that we avoid going to places where there is danger. It means we do everything we can to minimize risks. So probably the most high risk place I work is up in Svalbard because of the danger of encountering polar bears. Polar bears, because they are the top carnivores in the landscape and because they are often really living on the edge of their existence, they will hunt anything. If you become hunted by them, if you surprise them, if you get in their way of where they're trying to live, they can hurt humans and they can kill humans. So we spend a huge amount of time figuring out how to not have that happen, how to make sure that we see them and get out of their way before we do. But we also carry defensive equipment. We carry things that make noises to try and scare them away, but we do also carry weapons to protect ourselves if we need to. But the most important thing, my biggest success working in Svalbard is to have never seen a polar bear with my own eyes. I have never put myself in a situation where I was close to them, placing them in danger and placing myself and the rest of our team in danger. So in terms of avoid, I would say the most important thing we do is avoid danger.
Yeah, excellent answer. Guys, this has been a really great session, thoughtful questions, great answers for me. We'll take one last. Well, what was that? Sorry?
I was just saying, absolutely fantastic questions.
Yeah, they really have been, like, unusually fantastic, which is great. Mr. Case Glass, if you guys want to wrap us off with one last question, go right ahead, guys.
Are there many people you work with? Are there lots of dendrochronologists in the world?
Oh, yes, there are lots and lots of dendrochronologists. I couldn't tell you how many, but going by, I probably would say the immediate group of people, scientists I work with and chat with, and the people I would ask if I had a problem, a science problem, there's probably around 100. Wow. But in terms of people around the world who consider themselves to be dendrochronologists, it's probably thousands, actually. Probably the reason that we don't necessarily know that word is we might not call ourselves a dendrochronologist. I'm a professor of geography, so I work in a geography department, and that's probably how I would introduce myself to someone. I would say I'm a professor of geography. A dendrochronologist might also work in a biology department or an archaeology department or in an ecology department or something like that, definitely archaeology. So we're out there, we're a strange little pocket of tree scientists, because there's lots of different things that dendrochronologists do. So we might be, some of us are working in government, some of us might be working in museums, because deriving a date from an old piece of wood is a really important part of museum work. It's how we date buildings. Old wood is used to build buildings. Some of you have probably seen, very, very sad in Europe, there was a terrible fire in the cathedral in Paris, Notre Dame, last night, which destroyed a huge part of that cathedral. That cathedral was made of 800-year-old oak trees. So dendrochronologists would have explored those beams back through time, and they'll be involved in helping to figure out how to rebuild the wooden components of the cathedral. So archaeology is a really big, important part of dendrochronology.
Mary, this has been amazing. Is there a last message you want to share with kids about where they can learn more, get involved, anything that you want to wrap up with?
Well, I guess I would just say first, thank you so much for those fantastic questions. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you guys. It's fantastic to see how curious you are about the natural world. And just to remind you that science is for everybody. It's not just for brainy kids. It's not for people from a certain background. We are all scientists because we're all interested in and curious about the world around us. If you've ever looked at dirt on the floor or a leaf or a tree or a little insect or a little bug or your fridge or your cell phone and wondered how it works, you're already doing science. So remember that science is for everybody and you guys can be whatever you want to be.
Outstanding. All right, Dr. Gagen, what we do at the end of every hangout, and I'm going to demute every class's microphone right now. If all the classes could join me in saying a huge thank you to Dr. Gagen, go right ahead, guys. Awesome, guys. We appreciate all the classes being here so much. We hope you can join us more in April. Dr. Gagen, please come back anytime. You were amazing, and we'd love to have you.
I'd love to be back. Thanks so much.
All right, have a